So, hello. So today it's a continuation of yesterday's class discussing the Lotka-Volterra model for competition. So we discussed a lot of things yesterday. And at the final part, we wrote down a set of differential equations. And we found the fixed points. Okay? Now, we found there are 4 fixed points. But that doesn't answer the fundamental question, which is, if I start with a certain number of species 1 and a certain number of individuals of species 2, what would happen? Okay? Will there be competitive exclusion? But 1 excludes 2 or 2 excludes 1, and what will happen? Okay? So that's the point that we want to discuss today. So let me just review what we had done before. So we had species 1, some equation which was k1 minus n1 minus alpha n2 divided by k1, and dn2 something similar. Well, alpha and beta represent the facts. Alpha that represents the strength of the competitive pressure that species 2 exerts on species 1, and here's vice versa. Beta represents the strength of the competitive pressure that species 1 exerts on species 2. Okay, so I won't discuss again all the story that of yesterday. I hope you remember all the discussion. So these are the Lotka-Volterra equations for competition. And we found 4 fixed points. So the fixed points are the values of n1 and n2 such that if you have the population at that values, it won't change. It will stay there, okay? Which means that the time derivative is equal to 0, okay? So, and we found that we had 4 fixed points, which I denoted by a little star here, so to say that this is the fixed point, which was mutual elimination or no population at all. It was fixed point 1. Fixed point 2 was population 1 equal to some, to the carrying capacity, and population 2 extinct, eliminated. Then fixed point number 3 was symmetrical to this one, which was population 1 is eliminated, and population 2 is at the carrying capacity. And then there was a possible coexistence fixed point, which I have to look again here, which was n1 is k1 minus alpha k2 over 1 minus alpha times beta, and n2 star is equal to k2 minus beta times k1 over 1 minus alpha beta. Okay? So these were the fixed points. This is no populations at all. This is population 1 at carrying capacity, population 2 eliminated. This is vice versa with this one, and this is in principle a coexistent fixed point. Now, the point is that we want to know the stability of these points, and we want to know if I start with a certain population of species 1 and 2, where will they evolve? Will they evolve to competitive exclusion, or to coexistence, or to mutual exclusion? Okay? These are the 3 possibilities. So one way is to do this mathematically, which I want. This is the topic of dynamical system theory. It's not very difficult, but anyhow. So I will do this graphically. Okay? Now, let me introduce the concept of phase space. Or phase space is physics jargon, but anyhow, it's also used in ecology. So I have N1 and I have N2. Okay? So let me look at this at axis N1 and axis N2. So at every instant of time, if I say I'm here, meaning I have a certain value here of N1, a certain value of N2. Okay? Now, say this is the initial time, the time that you first measure the system, and you discover that it has certain value here and certain value at this axis. Okay? Now, if the system is not at a fixed point, or it's not in equilibrium, in static equilibrium, right, then over time the system will not stay here. Maybe N1 will increase, or N2 will increase. That can happen a lot of things. Okay? So over time, you will have this moving around. Okay? So you will have something which is a trajectory in the phase space. Okay? So at every instant of each of these points represents a different point of time, and this can go up and down and so on, and that's what we actually want to study in the next step. Okay? Is that okay? I mean, it's a representation of the system of two populations and how it changes in time. It's a graphical representation. Okay? So, okay, let's. And now what I want. Okay, so remember, where came the fixed points from? They came from putting this equal to 0, and this means N1 times K1 minus N1 minus alpha N2 divided by K1 is equal to 0, and N2 is equal K2 minus N2 minus beta N1 equal to K. Now, we want to draw here the points where N1 is constant, where dN1 dt is constant, and the point where dN2 dt is constant. Yes? The mic, where's the mic gone?
So if we had a function where r is equals to 3, for example, where you have something that never reaches the fixed point, we could also calculate it, and we could say.
No, I didn't understand that. If what?
If we had like a value of r, like 3, where we had this graph that never reaches the fixed point.
No, we are not talking about the discrete time dynamics. That was something completely different. Okay? That was the discrete time dynamics. This is not discrete time. That's a differential equation. Okay? So that's completely different. It's just because I have N1 and N2, but it doesn't have anything to do with So, and This R1 and R2 are ratios, and actually I omitted them because we are supposing they are non-zero. Otherwise, there is no sense. Okay? They are positive values, and so if I put it equal to 0, I don't need to write them. Okay? So now, I want to draw the points in this space. Do I have some other colors here, or I have only 2 colors? Let me see. Oh, I have one. So this is this first one corresponds to dn1 dt equal to 0. Okay, this is 0, then this is 0, and this is 0. Okay, where are the points on the plot here where this is 0? Okay, so first it is n1 equal to 0 and n2 anything. Okay, for this to be 0, only the first one, you can have either n1 equal to 0 and whatever value of n2. So this is this axis. Or you can have this thing equal to 0. So this thing equal to 0, you don't need to take into account the k1, okay, is given by this equation. Okay, so k1 minus n1 minus alpha n2 equal to 0. Okay, so what is this? This is the equation of a straight line. Okay, so if you want, so this is an equation of straight line. It gives you n1 in terms of n2 or vice versa. And how do I draw graphically this straight line? I just have to have 2 points, okay? And then it's just a straight line through the 2 points. So it's easy to find 2 points. I think n1 equal to 0, then n2 will be k1 over alpha. So n1 equal to 0, then k2 will be, n2 would be k1 over alpha. Okay? If I take n2 equal to 0, then n1 is equal to k1 here. And that's the straight line. Okay? That's a straight line. Now, on this line and on this line, the derivative of n1 is 0. Therefore, it does not change. Okay? So it's 0. Then on one side, it will be negative, and the other side will be positive. Okay? Now, where will it be positive or where will it be negative? So we know that near the 0, 0, everything grows. Okay? So on this side, which contains the 0, 0, n1 has to be an increasing function. So I will plot this like this. Okay? So sometimes you plot it even 2 things. So, and once you cross from where you are positive, you go to 0, then you will have to be negative here. Therefore, then you will have this. Okay? Okay, so this is called the line. This line is defined by dn1 dt equal to 0. And it's called a null line. Okay. Now, we want to study the fixed points not of n1, but of n1 and n2 of the whole system. So I have drawn this here for n1. I can do the same thing for n2. Okay? So that's what we were going to do on the same plot. And then if we want gn1 equal to 0 and dn2 equal to 0, this has to be the crossing of the lines. The crossing of the lines is where both of them are 0, and that's what we want. Okay? So it turns out that there are many possibilities, because now think just here what can happen if I draw the line for and dn2. So that the first thing is obviously n2 is equal, just write it correctly. Then you can have n2 equal to 0. That's the n2 equal to 0. And the other one will be given by, where did I leave my good chalk? Chalk lost. How can one so easily get the chalk lost? Okay, let me go with this other one, alternative. So here, in order to have the derivative of function dn2 dt equal to 0, I can have k2 minus n2 minus beta n1 equal to 0. That's again a straight line. And I will draw it in yellow. So sure, if n1 is equal to 0, then n2 is equal to k2. Okay? But now comes the point. It could be here or here. Okay? So we have to consider two cases. Okay? So k2 could be smaller than k1 over alpha. And then it could be also bigger. So the two different cases. Then this will be a straight line. Okay? But now there will be two possibilities. Say this one, we are looking at this one, okay? So k2 is here, okay? Now, the other fixed point is when n2 is equal to 0, which is n1 equal to k2 over beta, okay? But now, k2 over beta could be here or here. In the first case, the lines don't cross. Sorry. In the second case, the lines cross. Therefore, for k2 being here, there are two possibilities. But remember, k2 could be bigger than k1 over alpha also, which would generate more two possibilities. So we will have four possibilities. Okay? And that's what we want to discuss. Okay? So, in order to do this, let me, I wanted to do this is all on the same. I don't want to erase this. I don't want to erase anything, but well, I have to find some space. Okay, so I hope you have convinced that we have 4 cases to study. And I should try to draw 4 axes here. I will, Flavia will kill me about this, but okay. And therefore, I will draw the so-called null lines for both of equations for this here, okay? So let's start with the equation for n1, okay? So n1 can always be 0, okay? So this here in all cases. And then, as we discussed, you can have, let me do this here apart, you can have k1 minus n1 minus alpha n2 equal to 0, which is a line that crosses when n2 is equal to 0, n1 is equal to k1. And n2 is equal to k1 over alpha. So that's the one of the null clients, okay? Okay. Now, next step. We want to draw the other one. So the other one here is given by k2 minus n2 minus beta n1 equal to 0. And also by the line, by this line. Okay, n2 equal to 0. Yes. Mike.
Sorry, I'm not following very well. Okay. Why did you only got like the upper part of the equation to draw the graphs?
Because the k1 is positive. Here, you mean the k1?
Yes.
Yeah, k1, and this equal to 0. It can only be 0 if the numerator is 0.
It can only be 0 if what?
If the upper part here is 0.
Oh, okay.
Okay? The
Okay.
k1 is a positive constant. So I have 10 numbers, which one is positive and the other one can be 0 or not. So the only possibility is this part being 0. Right? Okay, so these are the points. The yellow points are points where the derivative of dn1 dt is equal to 0. Now we want to draw also the points where the second equation for n2 has also n2 has derivative equal to 0. So I will do the same exercise. And then the fixed points of the system of equation n, which will be the crossing of the lines. Okay? So here you already see one crossing. Okay? This is this one. Okay? Now, let's see. This line goes like this. Now, n2 can be 0 or, okay, this line. So this line can be given by, if I take n2 equal to 0, then n1 can be k2 over beta. Okay? So k2 over beta can be on this side, or it could be on the other side. So I will have two cases. So I will draw K2 over beta here, and K2 over beta here. K2 over beta here. Okay? Now, for both cases here, I can have a new point, okay, when n1 is equal to k, when n1 is equal to 0, n2 is equal to k2, okay? So, but then you can have k2 here, in which case the diagram looks like this one. And then you can have it here, in which case these lines don't intersect. And the same here. It could be here, in which case the lines do not intercept. It could be here, in which case they intercept. Okay? So that's the first step. Now, why I am drawing, just think. I'm drawing it. First, I need some water, otherwise I can't. So, now we have the 4 fixed points drawn here. 0, 0, because yellow intercepts with this one. I'm a little bit colorblind, so I don't, yeah, sometimes I say the wrong name for the colors, okay? So both can intercept here. This is the 0, 0. Here, okay? And here. These are, and in some cases you have the interception here. Okay? These are the case of coexistence. But we don't know if it's stable or not. And now by drawing things, we will come to the conclusion of what is stable and what is not stable. So let me just go in order to start with the best one. Okay, let's start with this one. It's K2. Now, remember, now we want to draw little sets. If I'm here, I know that for small populations, both of them will increase. Okay? Because if the population is small, okay, then this here is has no influence, then the population means small will grow. Therefore, I can grow here. I will draw something like this here, which means that both of them can grow. N1 will grow and N2 will grow. Now, this one is the null line where dn here, this one represents dn2 dt equal to 0. Okay? So if I cross this here, then this n2 has to have a negative derivative. Therefore, once I cross this, I have to write something like this. Let me find a better way. This. And still here you have this. Okay? And then here you will always have this because you have not any more crossing. But then here you will have kind of this because you are crossing again. Okay? So in this part, so let me, I have a composition of tendencies of this kind. So I will draw this, say, with a means that this is the tendency, here this is the tendency, and here this is the tendency. So what will happen is that this tends to go down, and here it tends to go in this way. Okay? So if it crosses here, it will go here. And if you start here and cross this line, then it will be in this direction. And if you cross it from below, it will go here. Okay? So at the end of the day, you go to K1 equal to N1 equal to K1 and N2 eliminated. Okay? So this point here is stable. So the stable fixed point in this configuration is N1 equal to K1 and N2 equal to 0. And the conditions will be, I will write down the conditions. Okay, now I think I can do it here. So this is the point here, this one, okay? So it turned out that it is stable if K1 over alpha is bigger than K2, okay? And K2 over beta is smaller than K2, K1. That's the conditions for this one. Okay? Yeah?
Just a question about definition. What's the nuke line? It's the plot, or it's the line that one of the derivatives
The nuke line is the line where one of the derivatives is 0.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
And that's a nuke line. So I have two nuke lines on the plot. And now we can go on with the same exercise. So the simplest one is this one, where you see that in this part it's always like that. Okay? The general tendency will be this. Okay? Now, when you cross the yellow one, its N1 should change sign. Instead of increasing, it has to decrease. Therefore, in this region, you have a set here. But anyhow, this one still grows. So a tendency going in this way. And if you cross this one, then you still have this, but now you have this. Okay? So if I go here, I start here, I get to this point, then where do I go? I go to K2. And if I start here, if I start here, I go directly, or maybe I will just cross this and then go this way. Okay? So at the end of the day, K2 is reached. Okay? Even if I start near K1. Okay? If I start near K1, this will take me here, but here I would go there. Okay? So K1 is not viable. I mean, what happens is this case here. And in order to have this plot, we had K1 over alpha was smaller than K2, and K2 over beta was bigger than K1. Okay. So okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Could you explain again how you know the tendencies between the lines? Because I understand for a small population and for big population, but between the lines, I don't really follow how you know the tendency.
For instance, take this one. The tendency is up, and both are increasing. So this is increasing, this is increasing. Now, when I cross this line, this is the line where dn1 dt is equal to 0. So if it was positive on this side, it has to be negative on this side. Okay? Therefore, you reverse this. But this one will only reverse when you go through the null line of n2. Okay? So first, let's first tentative discussion of what does it mean. This can be rewritten in saying that alpha is, in this case, alpha is smaller than k1 over k2, and beta is bigger than k2 over k1. Okay? This is the same. Okay? Just reversing. So alpha is the effect of population 2 on population 1. And beta is the effect of population 1 on population 2. Alpha can be small in some sense with respect to this thing. And beta has to be big. So alpha small means the effect of alpha, the effect of n2 on n1 is not very strong because alpha has to be smaller than something, and the opposite for n1 affecting n2, but beta can be bigger than something. Therefore, it is natural to think that the best competitor is n1 because it has a stronger effect on the population 2 than the population n2 on n1. Okay, so there's a question here.
But we're trying to compare alpha being smaller than k1 over k2,
Yeah.
and beta to k2 over k1, so it can be a little confusing.
Yeah, but this is okay. All of this can be made in a more mathematical way, which is just non-dimensionalize the system. Okay, but I want to avoid the non-dimensionalization of the system because this usually creates a lot of confusion, and this is a whole hour to explain. So this is it's not very formal here. Okay, so this does not mean exactly that alpha and beta one is bigger or smaller than one. Okay, so beta and alpha are compared to these values. Okay, and this is the definition where the population of n1 wins the competition and eliminates n2. Okay, under these conditions. Very nice. Now we have two other cases where we have the crossings, those. Okay. So now let's look at this one. Okay, and we start as usual. And here's the fixed point. Yeah. That's the fixed point. But you alpha has these fixed points, okay? K1, n equal to K1 and n2 equal to 0. And n2 equal to K2 and n1 equal to 0 are always there. And then you can have the case here, you want to have only two possibilities. The fixed point was either here or here. But it turned out that the system will go to this one. This one will be stable. And here it turned out it will go to this one, and the system will be stable with n2 equal to 0. And now we have the third possibility, which is coexistence, because both lines are crossing here in the middle of the plot. So if they are crossing, means that at that point, both derivatives of n1 and n2 are 0. So this is the first tendency. Okay. And when I cross this one, what reverses the sign. Oops, 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 oops. Oh, okay. When I cross this one, it's this one that gets here, and this one continues as it was before, so the tendency is to go this one. And if I cross this one, then I will have the tendency on this part will be, again, this one and this one. And then I have only remain in this one, where you have to reverse this one and not this one. So the tendency is like this. It's all of them are pointing to the central point. No matter where you start, you will get to the coexistence fixed point. So this coexistent fixed point is stable if, therefore, K1, let me write in a better way, K1 over alpha is bigger than K2, and K2 over alpha is bigger than K1. So under these conditions, this point is stable here. Okay? And again, you see, in this case, you would have these inequalities here, which is alpha would be smaller than K1 over K2, and, oh, here's a beta, no? Or is it a beta here? Yeah, the beta. And beta would also be smaller than something. Now, both are small, which is the definition of weak competition in this case. So they can be very small, therefore the mutual influences are not very important, and they can coexist. Okay? And obviously, they coexist at this point here, which is obviously smaller than K1 and smaller than K2, which means that the coexistence fixed points, population 1 does not attain the carrying capacity, nor does population N2. I saw something? No, okay. Now we have the final case. Okay? So the final case, it's where the things are more funny. Okay, so if we start again with that, here with this tendency, and now when we cross this one, I go here in this direction, and I still stay like this. Okay? So now it's pointing to this point. Now, if I cross this one reverses, and this one continues, so it's pointing to this point. And here you have both reversed, means that it's like this, and like this, and points this way. So, what happened? I can actually, if I go here, and I cross this point, this line here, it will go there. If I go from here and I cross it here, it goes there. But if I go here and cross it here, then it goes there. Therefore, both N1 equal to K1, N2 equal to 0, and N2 equal to K2, and N1 equal to 0, both of them are stable, and the coexistence point is unstable. So you have two possibilities. Okay? So, and this is when, let me write, okay, this guy is never stable, so we are not interested in it. So the coexistence fixed point is unstable, and then what are the conditions? K1 over alpha smaller than K2, and K2 over beta smaller than K1, which would imply alpha has to be bigger than K1 over K2, and beta has to be bigger than K2 over K1, which means that they are both somehow big numbers. Therefore, this means very strong competition. So, what's the general thing that we get out of this? Everything depends on the alpha and beta being bigger or smaller than, everything depends on alpha being, the relation between alpha and K1 over K2, it can be bigger or smaller, and the relation of beta to K2 over K1 being bigger or smaller. If you look here, you have them, both of them here, both of them are big. Both here, one is small, the other one is big. Here I didn't write it, but it's obviously the reverse situation. And here both of them are small, alpha and beta. So these are 4 possibilities. So everything depends on how strong the competition is. Alpha and beta are the strengths of the competition. And the result is that only when you have weak, very weak competition, then this point, this fixed point here, which corresponds to this plot, this guy is stable. Otherwise, you have always competitive elimination. In this case, you get always to the point K2. In this case, after some time, you will approach this point, which is N1 equal to K1, and carrying capacity in N2 eliminated. And in this case, you can get either here or there. But then you say, okay, but this is a deterministic system, and you have to know where you go. You cannot go arbitrarily to one or the other. So it will depend on what? On the initial condition. Okay? If I start here, okay, then I go this one, okay? Which means that N2 is already very a big number, and N1 is not big. And then if I start here, I go to this one, okay? So it's the effect of size, of initial sizes of the populations, okay? So here, somewhere, when you get here or here, it's not easy to see this in a way which we can do graphically. So it could go this way or this way, but then there are points that will separate the region which is attracted to K1 to this point, and the region that is attracted to the other point. Okay? So this is called a separatrix, the line that divides the basins of attractions of the fixed points. Okay? So this is a case which you have 2 stable fixed points. Okay? And it's a case of bistability. We already discussed a little bit about this. And the other ones are systems that have only one stable fixed point. Now, so this can be done mathematically through something which is called perturbation theory, but we don't want to go into this. And now, let us start to discuss the meaning of this. So we found that the ratio K1 over K2 is a kind of important parameter in order to measure if alpha is bigger or smaller than this ratio. And depending on the inequalities, I have either one result or other. Okay? So again, this one corresponds where the effect of the population 1 on the population 2 is stronger than the population 2 on population 1, and therefore the population 1 prevails. this is vice versa. Here the population of N2 has a strong effect on N1, and N1 does not have a strong effect on N2. Therefore, the N2 prevails. This one corresponds to the case, no, this one corresponds to the case where both influences, N1 and N2, both of them are small. So it's not very, competition is not very important in this case. Okay? And then you get coexistence. And finally, here, mutually strong competition. Mutually strong competition can go either to a carrying capacity N1 equal to K1 or N2 equal to K2, and it will depend on the initial condition, how many you have at your starting, at the point when you start to count them at time t equal to 0. Right? So these are the main things. So now let's put this in perspective of our discussion from yesterday. Okay? So I mentioned that Gauss formulated the principle of competitive exclusion, saying that populations that rely on same resources cannot coexist. That's the meaning of what Gauss was. And actually Gauss, in the beginning of his book, writes down, I don't know, I think a second book, which I could only find strangely in French, actually. But in this book, he actually starts discussing this system of equations. Okay, Gauss was an experimental, but he had no fear of differential equations. Okay, he was okay. He knew the work of Voltaire, which was in 1928. The experiments are 1934, and the system is called struggle for life. It's meant to be, the struggle is the competition in this case. Okay. So, and his aim was to show that we expect most of the time competitive exclusion. Now, can we, with these results of the mathematical model, how can we interpret the principle of competitive exclusion? Is it still valid principle or not? So the point is, we found that in 3 out of 4 possibilities, there is competitive exclusion, but there's one where the competitive exclusion does not happen, which is when the effects of competition are small. So, which is this one, okay? So if alpha and beta are sufficiently small, then you can have coexistence. But so alpha and beta is the competitive effect of one on the other. And what would it mean then to be small? Any idea? Okay, so don't think about the math now. Just what would it mean if populations have small effect, they compete, but the effect is small?
Maybe when the effect of the species, of the population on itself is greater than the effect of the population on the other population.
So this is true. Yeah, that is true. Okay, that happens because the interspecific competition is much stronger than that's true. But now, what would make it? I mean, now try to think about the species that they are. This is usually seen as a competition for resources, okay? Exploitative competition. And how would you interpret mathematically weak competition? Okay, so maybe. Okay, it's already going there.
they might be using the resources in different ways.
In different ways. Well, that's a possibility. So one thing is weak competition could be different use of resources. Now, usually, what do you think is that if they are using only they are specialists that use only one shared resource, then the competition will be strong because they have no alternative resource. But now, think they have a shared resource, which is not essential. Essential resources are the ones that even if you don't need a lot of them, you need some, okay, which would be, okay, so like, okay, usually abiotic things. So now say species 1 can have 3 resources, and species 2 has another 3 resources, but one of them is shared, okay? So resource 1, 2, 3, and the other one has 3, 4, 5. So resource 3 is shared, therefore they compete for this. But actually, maybe the competition is not very strong because there are other resources, okay? So this is the idea, that having a diversity of resources is something that should weaken the competition for us if they don't share all the resources, okay? Even if they share all the resources, maybe one is more efficient. Say they have 2 resources, and you have resource 1 and resource 2, but species 1 is better on resource 1, but species 2 is better in consuming resource 2. Therefore, they can coexist because they kind of don't compete so much, okay? So it's a hand-waving argument for this point. Because why? Because we are in a phenomenological theory. We are not modeling the resources, okay? And we will do this, and then we will reobtain the principle of competitive exclusion in a much better and more precise way than this one. Okay, question, and Mike.
Does that competition is only for more limited resources, or like water would also be a resource
so in principle, okay, so in principle, you could be any resource, be biotic or abiotic, but obviously it is only important if this resource is limiting. Okay, so there's some things that are limiting and others not. For instance, in the Amazonian region, water is not limiting resource because there's so much water. So if trees were to compete only for water, there would be almost no possibility of competition. But they compete for sun actually, okay, because they have the branches and so on. So that's something different. So. Okay, so the idea is that if you have a limited number of resources and if a species competes strongly for at least one of them, you will have the competitive exclusion, so expect exclusion, unless the competition is weak. Okay? Now, okay, so then comes the point raised by George Evelyn Hutchinson. Hutchinson is a guy that you should pay attention. It's the middle of the 20th century, about the 50s, 60s. And he was the guy that actually, in big part, Hutchinson and MacArthur and Pianka and so on, they actually created a lot of the framework to think theoretical ecology. So Hutchinson has 3 very important papers, actually. One is it's a paper, but it has a strange name, which all of them have strange names, and it's a little bit literary. So the one of them is it's called the Homage to Santa Rosalia, or Why Are There So Many Species? Right? Why are there so many species? If you explicit all its exclusions, why are there so many pieces? And then on the same topic, he has the a paper is called The Paradox of the Plankton, which is more or less the same line of reasoning. And then it's also, there's a very important paper, which is, it's what's a conference, a very important conference in Cold Spring Harbor, where all the famous guys of the time, not only in population and ecology, but also human demography and this kind of things, Cavalli-Sforza and Ernst Mayr, also evolutionary things. But then he was the guy that wrote the concluding remarks. And the concluding remarks is the name of one of the most cited papers he has written. It's in a conference paper, and which tries to summarize the importance, in this case, not so much of the competition, but on the density effects. Density effects are those effects which are nonlinear here. Okay? So just to give an idea of the importance of Hutchinson. But then comes the question, why are there so many species? Why is there so much coexistence? If you look around nature, there's coexistence of lots of them. And therefore, why are there so many? Right? So this shows that the importance of this kind of result is that it makes you pose questions that you would not otherwise pose, because if you don't have any expectation that the struggle for life will lead to the elimination of the weaker competitors, if you don't have this expectation, then you say, okay, just has a lot of species here, okay? Well, actually, this is not exactly the same thing, but there is something in ecology that more or less newer things, which are called neutral theory, which is kind of this saying that it's not so important to look at the interactions. But okay, we don't go to neutral theory. So therefore, we are glad to discuss the mechanisms of coexistence. What makes populations coexist? This is it's something that has been very strongly researched. It's difficult to make. With this theory, it's difficult to make predictions because of the phenomenological nature of this, but you can have better theories, which you'll discuss next week, which is consumer resource dynamics, which is also a way to model competition. Now, so we cannot make exact predictions here, but many people went on and tried to see what you had by Gauss, but it's paramecia in the lab. And then you control, because you can control that it's only one population in one experiment goes to the carrying capacity, and you have 2 populations that are 3, 4, 5. The environment is homogeneous, everything is nice and controlled. But now in nature, it's not like that. Okay, so in the field, okay, so much effort has been put into discussing why species do coexist, and this permeates still. Although this is not anymore a hot topic, it still permeates a big part of theory in ecology, that you think that at least to some extent competitive exclusion could be a way to shape natural selection, and this would be important. Okay, so all of this is bottom-up regulation. Okay, we still didn't talk about top-down, which is tomorrow, but bottom-up regulation somehow may shape the natural selection. So there is some content of a partial truth, okay? Something, there is some point. The other point is, well, there are so many species and they coexist and so on. So what's happening, okay? So let me see. What would be mechanisms that you could think could make coexistence possible? Which can be rephrased that maybe what are the mechanisms that could make the competition not be so strong? Ideas. First idea. So, and Mike. Mike on wait.
So two species, a species has a fundamental niche, and competition makes them narrow their niche, so they can coexist because they're not, they utilize in different parts of the...
Okay, so, yeah, I'm going to go to the idea of fundamental niche at the end of the class. Yes, yeah, so you could have, but this means that maybe you have alternative resources just, okay? So you have fundamental niche is usually thought it's very close to environmental conditions. So what are the ranges of temperature, or humidity, or whatever, or even of level of density of resources, or density of predators, or whatever, which are needed for the species to exist. For instance, for insects, if it's too hot or too cold, then they cannot survive. Therefore, there's a range of temperatures where they can survive. And then it's not only the temperatures, they need, I don't know, water, or what they need, which creates a kind of multidimensional conditions in order for this species to survive. And then there are the other species, maybe. And the other species also has a niche. This multidimensional conditions on temperature, on humidity, on food intake, and sometimes it's like, for instance, very important for birds is the size of the nutrients. You cannot, if it's too big or too small, you cannot get it. So there's this kind of thing of size of the food, and all these kinds of things that are necessary for this species to survive. And then you have another species, and usually this is drawn like this. Say you have two species. You have one species, and say you need, for instance, an axis here for temperature, and this one for humidity. Okay, but could be other things. Could also be biotic. But I will do it in 2 dimensions, but it's easier to draw. And then usually people draw this like this. Okay, there's a region where the species can exist. All outside this region cannot exist. And this is always true for any species, even for us. We do regulate temperature, but so, for instance, temperature is very important for insects. We do not regulate the temperature of the body. So all the metabolism, it changes very strongly with temperature. We do regulate, but also we cannot live in 100 degrees Celsius, okay? So, so this is, for say that it's fundamental, this is called the fundamental niche. It's the niche where, which is given by so this is what Hutchinson, that's the point of Hutchinson, okay? And then you can have another species which also has a fundamental niche, and maybe it overlaps, okay? So maybe it overlaps, and then here you would have competition. But see, there's an escape for both of them. Okay? So maybe here the competition is such that species 1 prevails on species 2, but species 2 won't be eliminated, but can shift to the other parts. In this case, you say N2 has a fundamental niche, but cannot occupy the fundamental niche in the presence of N1, but it has a realized niche. The realized niche, which is is less than the fundamental. This is the niche where it actually can survive even with N1 present, and even being a weaker competitor, so it loses here. Okay? So this is one idea, that the idea of niche, which has been developed essentially by Hutchinson and later by McCarter. But well, then people also think a little bit more like today. This is the old niche theory. So okay, this is old way. More modern niche theory it's a little bit more complicated, but then you will always have the idea that niches, you have some kind of niche, which is a kind of fundamental niche, and so on. And for instance, and if you have overlap of the niches, you have competition. And so the bigger the overlap between niches, the stronger the competition. That's the idea. Okay? And there are many ways to look at niches also. Okay, let me find here some nice plots in order not to make too much confusion. Okay, for instance, maybe a certain species needs 2 resources to survive. Okay, that would be resource 1 and resource 2. And then I draw something here. So this is kind of plot that people do. This is the case where resource 1 and resource 2, both of them are essential. You can, here in this region, okay, the species cannot live, cannot survive. So if the resources, both resources here, say resource 1 has a small value, okay, here. But even if resource 2 has a super high value, you cannot survive because resource 1 is essential. And vice versa. Resource 2 is also essential because even if you have if you have a small value of resource 2, then you have even with a big value of the other resource, both of them are essential in this case. For instance, this is a diagram that people use to explain, for instance, the idea that you have essential resources. Then you have also things like this. Instead of resources, you can have predators. Predator 1 and predator 2. And obviously you can have 3, 4, and 5, but it's not nice to draw this in 3 dimensions. That's why it's only 2. Then sometimes you will have something like this. Oops, contrary. Let me see. Predator. Yeah, okay. This is the niche, which means that if predators 1 and 2, both of them have a very large numbers, the species cannot survive. And if they are in these regions, intermediate or low values, then the species can survive. So it's also a niche diagram. Okay? So a real niche it's multidimensional. It has the resources, has predators, has the abiotic and biotic resources. So therefore, it's thought that niche overlap is what happens when the niche have strong overlaps, then you will have exclusion, but from if you have competition. But see here this is the niche with respect to predators. Then you could have another species which has a different case here, and even if this second species is bad at competing, maybe it's able to survive with more predators. Okay, say you have a second species which has this niche, then even if it's competing for resources, and it loses to species 1, species 2 can still exist because here it is able to survive the predator pressure, and while this one is not. Okay. And okay, now more real-life explanations of mechanism for coexistence.
They could coexist because of a common predator that controls them.
Yeah, that's actually we'll do this if two competing species have a common predator, then there can be coexistence. That's called community models. It's called diamond community models. We will take a look at this next week and so on. That's one possibility. So top-down regulation, we are just discussing bottom-up, but you can have a combination of top-down and bottom-up things. Okay, more ideas.
I also read one time that depending on each population distribution, they can coexist too. Like one has an aggregate distribution and the other has a dispersed distribution that permits them to coexist.
Yeah, so spatial effects. So this is a very important mechanism for coexistence, although this isn't usually a coexistence in a given region, but segregated spatially. But this is called sometimes the existence of refugia. Okay, so there are places where the weaker competitor actually can hide or actually has access, and the stronger competitor does not. And then it can get and survive in a certain place. So spatial dimension is many times a way of explaining coexistence in a certain case. And actually, when you take the Gaussian experiment and you repeat it with paramecia, but you mix a little bit of, glass dust. You have dust like this one. If this one gets broken, there's a little very small dust. Okay, so you try to it to very small, and you mix it in experiment. Then actually there's coexistence because I don't know one of the paramecia is able to get close to the spaces, and the other one not, and then. So I don't know the microscopic mechanisms, but this introduced spatial heterogeneity. So space not being homogeneous, maybe coexistence promoting mechanisms. So many mechanisms possible, and you see the idea of this is. Again, you have first you had you have a principle. Then you try to get a mathematical way of the principle. So this is more or less compatible with the idea of Gauss, Because there is coexistence, but it's actually a little bit better in Gaussian because we see coexistence in the real world. But it also calls for the idea that in order to advance knowledge in population ecology, you should try to see why species are coexistent. Why are they not competing strongly? Okay? So that is a way to shape also the theory. I mean, this is theory which is, that's very basic. It's already old theory, and it has been modified. Niche theory has been modified, lots of things. But still, there are people that think that niche theory should not be, should be abandoned and so on. There's a debate on that kind of thing. But it actually shaped a little bit, not to a large extent, the way people think about the species, the coexistence, and the effect of one species on the other. Although this is a very simple mathematical theory. Okay? So, okay. And I think that's it for today. So what comes next is top-down regulation, which is predator-prey dynamics, okay, which will start tomorrow, and maybe the day after tomorrow. And Friday we have the questions and answers again. Then we have a week, next week, with consumer resource dynamics and some of community modulus. Okay? Okay, any more questions about this topic or not? Okay. Okay, so we stop a little bit earlier. Okay, more time to have coffee.